a movie from about a decade ago, We Are the Millers. It's, I think it was like 2010, 2011, 2012, something like that. And it is about a family that goes on various adventures. I won't get too into it. It's not particularly appropriate for Sunday morning in a worship space, but there's a particular part that's particularly relevant to this sermon. At one point, the older daughter brings home a boyfriend, and he has a tattoo across his collarbone. This tattoo says, "No ragrets," spelled R-A-G-R-E-T-S. So the father is talking to this potential boyfriend and saying, like, so tell me about your tattoo. And he's like, "Oh, it's my motto. Like, this is what I live by." And the dad says, "Oh, so you have no regrets? Like, none?" He's like, "Nope, not a single regret." He's like, "Really? Like, not even a word?" Like, and it's like, "No regrets, not even a word." Like, not. And then the dad says, like, "Not even a letter?" It's like, "Not that I can think of." And then the movie kind of goes on from there, and that scene is dropped. But I love that. No regrets. No regrets is actually one of the most common tattoos that people get. There has been studies on different phrases that people choose for tattoos, and that is one of the more frequent ones. Sometimes people go on to have that tattoo removed. yeah, just the no, right there. So it's an interesting phrase. It's a motto that people have and that we hear a lot, particularly on social media and in pop culture, this idea of no regrets, like don't have regrets. I tend to be pretty skeptical, like when I hear about a particular human experience or emotion and we put no in front of it. I kind of have this feeling that there is a way in which our culture likes to produce this image that we should always be positive, that we should always have good feelings, and that if we're feeling something bad, like sorrow, longing, grief, regret, remorse, we're doing something wrong. And I don't like that. And so I like thinking through what might these experiences, these harder emotions, these emotions that may have a heavier or even negative feel about them, what might they have to teach us? I love Barbara Einrich. She has a book called I think it's called Bright-Sided, and it's basically about how this sort of relentless pursuit of positivity is a destructive thing for our mental well-being. And so I think it's helpful to hold up these other experiences and explore what might be going on with them. Alfred Nobel sat down to have coffee in the late 1800s. Somebody had just brought him the newspaper, and he opened it up, and quite to his dismay, he found his obituary. And the obituary was not a flattering obituary. Up until that point, Alfred Nobel had funded, produced, and invented artillery and newer and better ways to kill people. The obituary, the title of it was "The Merchant of Death, dead at 62," or whatever his age was, I'm not entirely sure. He went on to read, and I mean, it was just this scathing piece about how this greedy person had accumulated all of this wealth based on the misery that he had caused, that his wealth had caused other people. And what's really interesting about his story is that from that point forward, his life started to take on a very different focus. He wanted to be sure that when he died, his legacy would not be one of the merchant of death, even though he wasn't denying that that was indeed a part of his story, that he had invented dynamite, smokeless gunpowder, and other forms of artillery. But he wanted to do more than that, too. He wanted to do something that would be a benefit to human beings, one that when his obituary named it, he would, if he were still alive, which he wouldn't be at that point, presumably, unless somebody else made another mistake, it would not be able to say that his legacy is only that kind of misery and destruction. So what do we get? The Nobel Prize. He wanted to do something that would benefit humanity. And so he, created the Nobel Prize in physics and economics and literature, and also the Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Peace Prize being for an achievement that would bring greater peace and reduce conflict, and in a very real way, reduce the necessity of the very things that had built up his wealth, the artillery that had created the funds that he had. It's a compelling story, and I think it's compelling because it's a way in which regret is not simply something that we get stuck on, that we ruminate on, that becomes this sort of toxic bad feeling inside of us, but it's an example of the way in which regret might actually point us towards the future in a new and better way. It can help us evaluate the course, the direction of our lives, and think through, how do I want my life to unfold? How do I want other people to remember me when my life is no more? Daniel Pink is a social psychologist, and he wrote a really compelling book. It's called The Power of Regret. And I got to pick this up and read it just a couple of weeks ago. And he talks about the structure of regret as being this structure in which we look back to something that had happened in the past, and we wish it had been otherwise. And then the second part of the structure of regret is that we imagine that if it had been otherwise, things would look very different today, and the course of our lives would look very different today. He distinguishes regret from disappointment. Disappointment is something that we don't have responsibility over. It's something that we don't have control over. So I might I might be disappointed that I didn't win the lottery, but I might regret that I didn't buy a ticket. So that's kind of the basic difference there. I was thinking about it more in terms of news this week. George Santos might be disappointed that he was mobbed by reporters afterwards, but his regrets might far outnumber his disappointment, if he has any, which I don't know, and I leave that to him and whatever tell-all book, which I'm sure is to follow, might tell us. But so that's the basic structure of regret. And Daniel Pink says that regret tends to fall into 4 buckets, which I also thought was pretty interesting. Foundation, boldness, morality, and connection. So foundation regrets look something like this. I wish I had started saving money 20 years ago. I wish I had had a family when I was young and I had had children, and now that time has passed. That's a foundation regret. It's about the foundation of your life and having the resources and the kind of life that you having created that in the past and failing to create that in the past creates a foundation regret. Boldness regret. I wish I had had the courage to travel abroad. I wish when that promotion was advertised, I had had the fortitude and the courage to apply to it and to try to get the position rather than shrinking away from the opportunity. Moral regrets were some of the most interesting in that book. A number of people, and this is based on surveys of thousands and thousands of people who no incentive, but just an opportunity to come forth and talk about their deepest regrets. Many of them regretted hurting someone earlier in their life, and particularly in a way that was bullying or that, sort of stripped them of their humanity. And, looking back at that and just having a real regret. And sometimes the moral regrets were the deepest, the most cutting, the ones that would keep people up at night. Lots of people with moral regrets also reported infidelity as a part of their regrets, their moral past that they wished had been otherwise. And then regrets of connection. I wished I hadn't let that friendship drift apart. I wish I hadn't had that blow up with my family that caused us to be estranged for 5 years. Those are regrets of connection. Daniel Pink says that most regrets seem to fit within one of those categories. Now, what he says is that regret can go one of two directions. And this is where I think the no regrets philosophy comes in, but gets it wrong. So one direction that regret can come in is we can have a regret in, say, one of those 4 areas, and we can start to ruminate on it, wallow in it. We can start to experience this kind of psychic or psychological stuckness, this kind of deadness inside us where we just keep returning to it over and over again, wishing it had been otherwise. But there's another possibility for regret. This is the possibility that we talked about with Alfred Noble. It's the possibility that we might turn to our regrets, turn to that heaviness that we're carrying within ourselves, and then think, there's a teacher in this. There's a lesson in this. I can choose to live my life differently from this point forward so that the course of my life will take a different turn so that I won't repeat some of these same mistakes. I think the no regrets philosophy tends to associate regret only with that wallowing. And if that's the case, if that's all that regret is, then I'm with the no regrets philosophy. Time to get rid of it, dispense with it. But I don't think that's all it is. I think that regret can teach us to live differently. So Daniel Pink also gives a couple of ways in which we can sort of lighten the grip that we have on our regrets so that we can live into a different way of being with those regrets. So one of the things that he says can help with this is disclosure. When we tell someone that we trust, tell someone that we know that we can be vulnerable with, a regret that has been weighing on us, that has been gnawing away at our soul, perhaps one that we have not told other people, that can lighten the burden. It's been shown to lighten the burden. That is something that social science research has shown has ameliorated some of the need to keep returning to it over and over again and wallowing on it. And instead, it can produce, it doesn't get rid of it, but it produces a way of holding it in which we might have some agency to create change about it. I think that's a particularly interesting one because that gets very close to some wisdom that comes from different religious traditions, disclosure, confession. And we Unitarian Universalists were some of the first to be like, confession out. we're throwing that out. And I think that there was a sense in which, there was some, whatever drama that was in which you're telling a religious professional this thing so that you can get right with God. Like it wasn't the right framing for what was happening there. It wasn't the right way to think about that. But the idea that you might tell another person, it doesn't have to be a religious professional, it can be a friend, that you have this regret, that can alleviate some of the toxicity of that regret, some of the weight that regret has, as it kind of holds us in place, makes us feel stuck, makes us feel like it's dragging us down. And then the other thing that Daniel Pink talks about is self-compassion. Can you have some compassion for yourself first, that you're a human being, that you have flaws, that you make mistakes, that everybody makes mistakes? I mean, sometimes I think we talk about our regrets like, oh my God, I cannot believe that I made a mistake in my past. And it's like, well, of course you made a mistake in your past. You're a human being. We all make mistakes. So can we hold some compassion for that? Can we hold some compassion, some self-compassion also, that maybe there were circumstances, particular stresses that we were experiencing that caused us to behave in a way that fell beneath the standards that we hold now? Can we have some compassion for that as well? The interesting thing is that a lot of people say when this concept of self-compassion is introduced, they'll say something along the lines of, well, that just sounds to me like, I'm just giving myself a get out of jail free card. But that's not what happens. What's really interesting is that when people don't have self-compassion, when they have no degree of self-compassion, they feel stuck. They're stuck in that rumination. They cannot create change in their life because they feel like that is something that is, was inexplicably bad, unexplainably bad. There's nothing that can be done about it. And, it is just a part of the past that they have to live with as this enormous burden. But when they're able to experience some self-compassion for where they were at the time that they made that mistake, that they had that regret, they start to experience a sort of opening of interior space so that they can make a different choice now, so that they can correct for whatever mistake it was that they had made. There's this thing that Jesus says, which is that if we knew when the thief in the night was going to come, we would stay up and keep watch. And that came to me as I was thinking about regret, because it can seem like regret is like this thief that arrives sort of inexplicably, it's just like sort of like, oh my God, I'm like suddenly like stuck in regret. And then I was like, you know what? No, that's not quite right. Regret is more like a thief in broad daylight, right? Regret is more like we know what our regrets are. We see them walking up to the house, then we open the door and they come in and they throw all of our furniture around and steal stuff from us and leave. And we just keep opening the door and like allowing that drama to happen again and again and again. What if we change the way that we hold our regrets? What if we change the way that we address our regrets by disclosing it to someone else, having some compassion for where we are, and then allowing the course of our future to look different? I think there's some real power in that. Now, I don't often close my sermons with like a concrete take home where I'm like, here's the takeaway, here's the assignment, here's what I want you to do. You need to go do X, Y, and Z. And a part of that's because I trust you to hear whatever it is that I'm saying and apply it to your life in whatever way that you think is needful. But today it's going to be a little bit different, okay? I encourage you to think about one of your regrets. one that has gnawed at your soul for some time. And then see, does it feel like this might be the right time when you might tell another person, a trusted person, what's happening for you? Might it be the right time to give yourself a little bit more self-compassion, a little bit more understanding around that? And then consider also, is there a lesson in that regret, in that mistake that I made, such that I might be able now to move forward with a different course of action? If that provides some alleviation to the hurt and the wounds that we carry, then it will be worth it. And this place, this loving place, will be better able to hold all of us in care, in love, and yes, in compassion. Amen.